Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the 11th Annual Denver Startup Week. We're all very happy to be back in person this year. How many of you, is this your first Denver Startup Week? Good chunk. Awesome. How many of you are founders? Awesome. How many of you are investors? Smaller proportion, but everybody, all the founders, just check those people out. And how many of you have raised money already? Awesome. I'm forgetting service providers to startups, lawyers, accountants, CFOs. All right. Awesome. Well, welcome, everyone. We, of course, want to thank all of our sponsors, our title sponsors, Amazon, Capital One Cafe, Dell for Startups, and the Downtown Denver Partnership. This session is part of the Founder Track, as you can see. Sponsored by Madison Taylor Marketing. The Founder Track is one of 8 programming tracks aimed at supporting the entire entrepreneurial team. Hopefully you have been to some more events this week or can go today. We also want to thank our venue hosts here at Denver Place. People in the back, if you can't hear us, just raise your hand and we'll try to hold our mics closer. Wanted to let you know that by attending this session, you are agreeing to follow the Denver Startup Week Code of Conduct, as well as agreeing to be recorded via photograph or video. And please feel free to share your experience on social media with the hashtag DenStartupWeek. My name is Sarah Bolden. I am a partner and the head of the Denver office of a law firm called Silicon Legal Strategy. We are one of the headline sponsors of Denver Startup Week this week. We sponsored the Tuesday happy hour, so I see some of you that we met there, and if I haven't met you yet, hope to meet you soon. We support startup tech companies and the VC investors who back them. We have an amazing panel here with a lot of different perspectives. Tim, Julie, Peter, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself, say your name, how you're connected to the startup community, and for fun, your favorite fall activity.
Great, thank you. Great, my name is Tim Shukar. I'm CTO and co-founder of Gameboard. We are actually located here in Denver, just down in Larimer Square. I would say is that it? Is that good?
Yeah.
Fall activity? Okay.
Maybe more Gameboard.
More Gameboard?
Yeah.
Great. So Gameboard is a tabletop social gaming console. Our whole mission is how do we bring people together around gaming again? So not just on a headset, not just looking at a TV, but actually it goes from a vertical screen to a horizontal screen. Now we're engaging with each other again. So think Netflix meets tabletop gaming. Favorite fall activity would be, it's probably very stereotypical, but just getting in the mountains and seeing the aspens change color. That is just breathtaking.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Julie Penner, and I have a couple different roles. So I wear a venture partner hat with a group called Fraser Group, which is a family office out of Utah. I also am the entrepreneur in residence at the Telluride Venture Network. And I'm also the founder of Soul of Startups. So I work with leaders and executives and CEOs on leading from the inside out, which is sort of my business philosophy as well as my leadership philosophy. So, and my favorite fall activity, it's like there's a magical day in the fall when all the mosquitoes die. And the day after that, my favorite activity is sitting outside in my wonderful, now mosquito-free backyard and just enjoying the leaves overhead in my wonderful treed backyard.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks. My name is Peter Vols. I am general counsel at Munich Re Ventures. I'll tell you a little bit about Munich Re Ventures. We're the venture capital group of Munich Re, which is one of the world's leading providers in reinsurance, primary insurance, and risk-related solutions. We are a financially driven venture capital firm, but also focused on the strategic objectives of our parent in Munich. We invest focused primarily on 6 sectors: insurtech, P&C, life and health, climate tech, the future of transportation, cybersecurity and privacy, and equipment technology. My role at Munich Re Ventures encompasses all things legal, both from the perspective internally on the operational side and externally when working with our portfolio companies on governance matters as well as fundraisers. And work very closely with my fantastic team at Silicon Legal on all of that. So, oh, and my favorite fall activity is actually now Oktoberfest, because I am now by default a Munich Re a Munich Re German. So,
well, thanks. We're glad to have you all here. The first question I think is really for Tim, but if you guys have also done this in your past lives, how has your company gone about raising money for a startup?
It starts off beg, borrow, and steal is basically the very beginning of it. We started out doing a family and friends round, just pretty much like I'm sure most of the founders in this room. Going in with basically an idea and using your personal relationships and family, saying, "Hey, come on, what can you guys give us here?" and start off with that route. Taking that money, not paying yourself obviously, and really making sure that all gets in a product, getting to some place where you've actually got a prototype, something that shows that this is something that can be done, right? For us, that meant getting into a Kickstarter. We did a Kickstarter to prove out that there was a market demand for this, that people were like, this is fantastic. We really want this, and generating that community interest from it. At that point, then we were able to do we did a series. We did 2 actual back-to-back convertible notes. One with SOSV Hacks, which is they're a global VC firm, but they actually do a lot of it's almost an accelerator that's based out of China, so out of Shenzhen. So they got involved, which actually then gave us more validity, because now we've got somebody who does know hardware very well, who can actually make sure that this product gets out and into the market. After a while, we ended up doing a Series seed round, which again had various levels of angel as well as VC participation. And then right now, and that was about 4.8 million at the Series seed in total. And now we're in the middle of closing a bridge round of another 3.5 to kind of get us over the final hurdle.
And this is for everyone. So what do you think the first thing a founder should do after you've closed, you're celebrating, you have money in your bank account? It's sort of anticlimactic because you really just exchanged signatures. What do you do first thing?
I would say the first thing is sleep, because it's a lot of sleepless nights until you get there. Although there is kind of a piece that I think was new to me, at least when we were doing this. You think, I close this round, here comes all the money, and then we're going. It kind of trickles in. Like, it doesn't always happen right away. So some of your VCs like, hey, I just closed this fund. I can't fund you until this date. Sign the paperwork, but you don't get the money. So it's always, the adage is always, it's not real till it hits the bank, right? So you might have all the paperwork signed, and we did, and we had some investors that never came through. So we had to reopen it back up and go through that whole process in order to get that to happen. But I think the next thing is, you have to execute your plan, right? I mean, there's likely, outside of family and friends, you had a plan when you went to investors and said, hey, because one of the first questions they're always going to ask is, what are you going to use this money for? Say, I'm going to hire people. Great, to what end? Right, so making sure you have these milestones that you're going to say, hey, we're going to use these funds to hire these people to get to here. And then what's coming out of that? What are you measuring? What is the data? And making sure that you have a plan so that at the next time you get to that next stage, Series A for us now, right? We have a lot of milestones that we're hitting and a lot of data points that we're gathering so that we can tell the story of, look, product market fit, we just need to, we need gas and just to hit the accelerator and go. Without that, your vision and your likability, starting as you go further down the road, it's not going to help. You won't get a Series A unless you really have those firm milestones and track record.
Yeah, I'm going to build on both of those. My first response to someone who just closed a round is take a break, which is counterintuitive, but the difficulty in raising a round of funding often is so draining, especially for a CEO who's been out there meeting. Like, they do need a reset. I'm saying, take a long weekend, take a week if you need it, because the next sprint is going to be just as hard as the last one, if not harder. And you just really closed on something that is big and challenging. And so I think doing that reset also allows leaders to come back and be fresh when they sit down for the planning session that needs to happen right after the round. What I see happen is executives or the leadership team, they either do a planning session as they know they're going to finish the round, like they have a lead investor, or they know they're going to get over the fundraising hurdle. They have an offsite to make their plans because they've pitched what they're going to be able to do in a year and a half or 2 years. But what next quarter looks like, or what's the first 30 days after we close on this money, having a good idea about what that looks like, to like break down that plan into the milestones, right? I agree. It's the first thing that needs to happen, so that you know, all right, well now I have this money. The worst case scenario, right? The opposite of that is you just start firing bullets because now you have them. And I've seen that behavior as well, right? Because just because you have funds doesn't mean there's not discipline that needs to happen as soon as you get the money in the bank.
No, I would echo all of that. I think it's important to have a game plan set up, before you close, just so you know, kind of, and you can hit the gate running, right out the gate and know what you're going to do. I would also say that you should never stop raising, right? Like always kind of be thinking ahead for the future, after obviously you hit these milestones, what's the next step after that? And I think a lot of founders tend to kind of, rest on their laurels a little bit when they have some money in the bank, but forget that it's kind of a, it's a long-term game, and you should never stop raising money as well.
Well, so we've talked a little bit about right after you raise funds. You all have touched on the fact that you need a business plan. You need to have that strategy of what you're going to do in the coming month, quarter, year. And you don't want to just fire off bullets because you have them. So what are some of the things that you would, what are the top 3 things you'd prioritize in the months after the raise?
It's always going to be founders first, so.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the firing bullets thing, right? Whenever we close a round, we just assume that we have underraised, right? Because it's very easy to say, oh, we got all this money, let's make all these hires and do all this stuff. So, making sure that when you say, okay, we know we've got $4 million, great. Let's not assume that's enough. Let's assume we needed 6 or something like that, right? So that you're really watching your burn as you're going forward. So, it is exactly as Julie was saying earlier. It's making sure that you have your plan that you laid out for investors. That might be stale, right? I mean, you might be raising for 3 months, and then when you're actually getting the money, making sure that you are saying, okay, how are we going to deploy this in the best way, and looking at macro factors, right? I mean, one of the reasons that we are doing a bridge round right now is we want more data. We signed a massive distribution deal with GameStop, which is we want to actually get data on that as well. But the other thing is the macro economy kind of went to shit, right? I mean, so we said, well, let's not raise a Series A because we don't have the data points that we wanted, and 2, we'd get killed on valuation. So I think those are the kind of things that you have to say, okay, let's now reevaluate. Maybe we'll do a smaller bridge round. We're going to extend our burn just until we get a better place in the economy. And it's about making sure you're staying on top of it, immediately after the raise. I think longer term, it comes back to always be raising, and always you've got to be maintaining those relationships perpetually.
I think my answer is that it's so business specific what comes first. One thing I will say that, again, this is what happens when you get a couple lawyers on a panel. We're so unsexy about our answers. One thing that we haven't talked about is paying off some of the debts that you have from the last round, because some of those service providers may have been able to give you terms. Hopefully, you should be negotiating terms for anything that you can't pay right now, right? Like paying some will often get you, a relationship where they keep serving you. But closing on funds means you can often pay off some of those debts and kind of be clean in terms of your balance sheet. Because those service providers, if the relationship is going well, you want to continue those relationships, right? So that's like a super basic thing, but you'd be surprised, right? Like, you got to be smart about your cash flow. I'm not saying have zero debt. That's not a smart business plan. But where you've been really pushing stuff off, like this is a chance to catch up before, like, you probably are going to need that credit from that service provider or that vendor again in the future.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I would also say that bringing the right people on board is imperative, and not to think as a founder or a co-founder that you have to go it alone. Really bringing on people to help in strategic ways that are going to free you up to do what you need to do, I think is super important. And also leveraging on your investors. Certainly from my group, we have a really broad depth of experience, and I think a lot of founders are weary to kind of leverage help from investors sometimes, but we really welcome that type of relationship. So leveraging those relationships, bringing on key people, and realizing it takes a village to accomplish what you need to do.
Peter, that's a great segue to my next question. So how do you decide which roles to fill in your organization and when? I've seen companies, fill sales roles right off the bat, and maybe the product's not ready. So maybe that's not the best decision. So what are your pieces of advice that you can provide?
Yeah, so I think like you said, it's very company specific, right? And I think you have to look really granularly at your targeted milestones and kind of back out of it that way, right? Like, it's not going to be a one size fits all solution for every startup, but knowing where you need to go and kind of looking at it from a broader perspective of, okay, who do I need to make X happen, Y and Z as well, right? And being able to really focus in on what's going to free you up as a founder to let that happen.
I have one I would suggest and one I would often think is a trap for startups. If you have a key hole on your leadership team, I think that's the first hire to make, because they're going to hire their own team, or they're going to, you need, especially at younger stages in a business, you need player coaches, right? People who can do the job and know how to train people to do the job. And that's a really difficult hire. So it's going to take a while. So you should start now. And you might want to try some folks on. That's going to take a while, right? So I think, and they're going to want to hire their team and their own vendors and have set a lot of direction. So I think if you have a keyhole in your leadership team, I think that's a natural starting place. If you're absolutely dying in one area of the business, obviously plug those holes. But the place I often see founders think they're going to hire and it doesn't go well is in sales. Right? Oh, I just raised money. I can finally not do sales. I can outsource that function. I am here to tell you, as a founder, you're going to be doing sales way longer than you want to. Way longer. Years, potentially. And what I see folks do is think they're going to totally outsource that sales role to somebody else as soon as they raise. I would just disabuse you. I've almost never seen it in a startup happen that way. So it sounds like Tim's about to agree with me, so I'm gonna let him.
All right. Yeah, I mean, certainly I would agree with that. I mean, it comes down to, how could you expect someone else to sell your product if you can't do it yourself, right? So that's a big piece of it. And you could hire the best salesperson out there, but if you're just like, oh, just go sell it. And if you haven't gone out there and understood what are the pain points from people, why are people either saying, great, I'm in, or no, I'm not in, right? One, you're not going to be able to enhance your product. but two, that salesperson's going to fail, and usually a lot of them are based on commissions, and if they're not making any sales, they're going to get out of there, right? They're not going to stick around for something that's just paying their base salary. They're, really good salespeople are used to making a big piece of commission on that. So, we ended up hiring head of business development, and for that's in the gaming industry. He comes from Lego and Hasbro and all sorts of different things. And poor guy, for about 2 years, he just kind of floundered with me, and he stuck it out with us, thank God. But I mean, I was there on every single meeting, every single call, traveling around. Well, not during COVID, but since then we've certainly been going out. But you've got to do that. If you're not going to be willing to do that, I mean, I'm not a salesman, but you know what? You have to put that hat on. You've got to do it. To get back to the original question, we have a product that is hardware, right? There's a physical hardware device that we're making. We've got, of course, the OS that sits inside there. We've got all the front end and the back end in the cloud. We've got a companion app. We've got literally like this very wide tech stack that we deal with. So again, to totally agree, getting the right heads of those departments was so critical. At the very beginning, I'm basically just trying to make hires and kind of cobble something together. And we spun our wheels a lot because we didn't make the right hires. I went off of someone saying, oh yeah, this is the direction we're going to go. So, all right, well, you probably know what you're talking about. And they didn't. And we just completely spun our wheels for a good maybe 9 months. Like it almost took the company out. So getting the right people in there, they get their processes in place, they get their people. Now we're humming. Like it is just such a market difference when you get the right people in there. But yeah, outside of that, it's tough, and talent will always be a challenge. Always. I mean, even we've made some great hires, and then a better opportunity came along, and they ended up leaving. And it's you feel like, I finally got everybody in place, and then something pops out, and then you're always having to go back. So I think the other key function outside of sales, as a founder, you've got to always be looking for talent, like constantly. So it's even if you're maybe not hiring immediately, keep your feelers out there as people are popping up. Keep reaching out and forming those relationships so that if they come available, or maybe it is something that we have a need for now, being able to make a move, you're going to be miles ahead as opposed to scrambling and reactionary.
So we've talked a little bit about the team. In terms of other stakeholders, you also have your new investors on board. So how do you engage your investors going forward?
We have, I guess I'll take first if that's right. So we have two categories of investors, minority and majority stakeholders, and really that's just information rights is basically all that comes down to. So we use Visible VC, which is a platform that allows us to put together, depending monthly or quarterly updates, depending on the stakeholders, and then we send out all this. And it's nice as founders because then we can see, did they access it? How much time did they spend on it, right? So we can kind of tell who's actually vested in not just money, but saying, how can I help them? What can we do? And we always make asks as well. So at the end of each of those emails, it's saying, hey, here's this, everything that's going on. Here's our reporting. Here's our data. These are our asks. And we always get people to respond out of that. So I think that's a key piece that we didn't do a very good job of up front. We said, great, thanks for the money. And then we just kind of sent out some data. And I said, no, we need to really be engaged and say how they have a huge leverage. Their portcos, maybe there's synergies there. They certainly know people from everywhere. So it's how do you make sure to say, hey, I really need a head of hardware engineering. And then they can reach out to their market or their network and help bridge that gap, or I need help with influencer marketing or something, right? I mean, you'll be surprised how much value that they can provide.
All right, so I have a school of thought on investor communication. It's probably the biggest pet peeve of your investor for you to go dark after they write a check. And it happens all the time. So you can set yourself apart from other founders for follow-on capital just by being a good communicator. The same good communication that gets rounds done also gets next rounds done. So FYI. Okay, so right size the following advice for the size of business you are and what you can do logistically. But I think there are actually 3 circles of communication that you need to develop systems around in your company. The first is your current investors, like what Tim was saying, right? They have information rights. They need to know how the company is doing. They're sort of like full kimono. They get to see everything. Well, at least if they have information rights, right? So you have that group. So write that update, at least quarterly, if not monthly, depending on the speed of your business. Then cut out the most sensitive stuff and send it to your prospective investors for the next round, or for other mentors or advisors or other people that are like hanging around the hoop that are your helpful people that aren't going to share your information with the wide world, right? They're reputationally constrained. That's that second book. See, it's not a whole new update. You're just cutting out the most sensitive stuff. You're just deleting. Okay, then you're going to delete again, and that's your community email. And so like you take out anything negative and you're just a cheerleader for your company and you're like, rah, rah, rah. By the way, your asks can stay in all 3 of those emails. And I like to have, to Tim's point, a super easy ask and some harder asks. Because a super easy ask is a way to understand if people are engaging with your company, right? Can you tweet this? Can you share that? Hey, have you seen a great whatever, right? Something easy. And then hard stuffs like do you know a VP of engineering, right? Who can you refer folks, right? So different levels of asks, different levels of communication. Now, if you're new, if it's just you running your company, right, do one update. But develop over time those 3 different lists and just delete your update and send them out to those prospective groups. Make sense? Yeah.
No, I think that's great advice. That's and I certainly share your sentiment about going dark on investors after you raise. I think also obviously with information rights, for those of you that don't know, after you raise an equity round, typically the investors get to look at your financials on some time basis. So certainly with having info rights, we'd expect those to be timely. Also, especially with our portcos, we have a pretty close relationship because there is this strategic element to it, and that we're working with them on the product, on de-risking the product. So, we also take observer seats, and our observers are in constant communication with our portfolio companies and really helping them kind of leverage their networks for key hires, or giving strategic advice just in general. So I think it's great to keep those kind of close personal ties, as well as some of the formal stuff that you guys mentioned.
Yet another good segue. So when you raise a round, you might be giving your lead investor a board seat or board observer rights, where they have the opportunity to attend your board meetings but not vote. So what advice do you have for founders on how the cadence of board meetings and the way that you control them? How do you efficiently and effectively run a board meeting?
Just start on that one. So obviously it's I think it's stage specific on how often you have board meetings. Typically, we're stage agnostic, but we're right in the A and B range, and we expect kind of quarterly board meetings, I say would probably be normal. As far as picking your board members and your observers, I think it's pretty standard that oftentimes the lead investor will take a board seat, and then with observers, I think you have to be very sparingly about that and think closely. Think about really who you want in the room. Oftentimes, I think you'll have observers that are a little bit more vocal or want to chime in and kind of are more of a distraction than a value add. So you think closely about the relationship you have with that person on an individual basis, whether you think there'll be a value add in the boardroom, and whether you think they'll just be a distraction. But again, I think it's stage specific, but every company is going to kind of take its own course on how many observers they let in the room. I've seen more, I've seen more lately that more observers kind of tend to cause a distraction. So
for the first time, I'm going to disagree just a little. but I think that's a spicy panel. So I totally agree with the cadence, right? It does depend. I have seen companies go as few as a month, but it feels like too much work to do it at that cadence. A 6-week check-in, so like breaking the quarter, can kind of be nice, even if it's a quick call, especially if things are moving really fast. But I love the quarterly cadence in general. And so do your investors, right? Because think about it from your investors' perspective. They have dozens of board meetings. It could be 8, 10, 12 board meetings to attend. And if they're all in the same cycle, right, it's actually a lot of their time. It's their job, I'm not complaining, but just like imagine that world where your whole life is board meetings. So they don't want to do more, right? But they still want to know what's going on and they want to be helpful. On the board observer seat, I agree that small groups, small boards are powerful, but I do think board observer seats, you have a little more influence as a founder about who those, I think that's what you were saying, right? Like be choosy about who you give that right to, either in the investor doc, which often is where that board observer right will be, like in the investment docs is where they'll ask for it and you can accept it or not. But you can also invite others to be board observers. And here's where having a diverse board is up to you. You have some control here, right? You need to talk to your board about it, right? You don't want to surprise someone. But I've also been added to boards as a board observer to bring a different perspective. And I think you have a lot more power than a lot of founders know that they do in terms of who's in that room, right? So I agree with Peter, do think carefully about who's in the room and really advocate for the folks that you want and think about the diverse voices that you want in the room as well.
So we do quarterly board meetings. It's pretty easy right now because it's just Shale, my CEO and co-founder, and myself are the only ones on the board. So, but we did give away 2 board advisor seats. One to SOSV, which is again the very first one. That's the hardware investor, which we very much need them in the room. And then 2 to the TVC, which led our seed round. So definitely was in all the documents. And it's funny, when we first did that, I was thinking, oh, this we'll see how this goes, right? And even before we started Game Board, I remember going to my first board meeting thinking like it was almost like a report card, or you're going in to see the teacher or something, right? And you're like, oh, this is going to be, I don't know what this is going to be. Take that mentality and exactly say, let's flip this. Say, let's be honest about where the state of the business is and ask for help, right? And again, that's something where they're always, they want to help. They have a vested interest in helping, obviously. And again, it's something where with TVC we have our unofficial board meeting, and then we have kind of a quarterly review with them as well. And I even remember that first meeting, I prepped like crazy, right? I had this huge deck put together. We had all this stuff going through, and they basically got on and said, "Oh, you don't have to do any of that. Just talk to us. How are things going? Where are your challenges? Where are your successes? Where can we help?" And it was such a breath of fresh air, and that's why, again, picking the right people is going to be very important. We have WhatsApp groups with both Duncan from SOSV and then Andy and Laura from the Venture City, and we literally will ping them at any time, right? And like day, night, whatever, we were just able to hit them back. They'll come back to us immediately. So it is having a good relationship there is pretty critical because it is something that you're getting advice from, but they're also just a great resource. And again, coming back to the Portco side, they've got so many, and not just personal advice, but ways to connect you with people who can help as well.
I'll also add that you should invite your corporate counsel to attend your meetings. They'll do it for free. We don't charge for that time. It helps us keep a pulse on what's going on with your company. We can take minutes. We can make sure you're have good corporate hygiene and are approving things as you should. So add your lawyers. They're not going to take up a ton of time, but it'll
and
help.
It's privilege then.
Yes. Also, in terms of how you run the meeting, so I have founders who maybe they have an hour for their board meeting. Sometimes they schedule 4 hours, which seems a little bit long. Ideally, you're sending out your materials in advance so that your directors can look at the stuff beforehand, and then you can focus, like Tim said, on the strategy. What are your pain points? How can we help? So you're not just giving them the update the entire time.
If I could add to that, the companies I like the best are the ones that do that in a shareable format. So they put it in a Google Doc or in a Loom video or both. And then you can comment as an investor, and that's shared amongst the entire board. So we can build on each other's comments. I understand before the board meeting happens how the other investors on the board feel about the update and then we get right into it. Way better than sending out a static document that is hard. Like then the founder is then fielding comments from the board separately and has to reconcile them in front of the board. Like that's just more time wasted.
So I mentioned legal counsel, so we're going to go there next. So when you raise a round, you do have legal fees. They're helping prep all the documents. You're often covering your lead investor's legal fees too. So you may want to run away from your counsel after your round. Hopefully not. Hopefully you keep them engaged. What are some tips you have to keep using your legal counsel effectively after your raise?
Sure. I think legal counsel is just so important right from the get-go, and it's super easy, especially if you're just starting out, to kind of go, you know what, I can file the forms my own, I can get by without this. When you're raising money, there's all these little things that you don't know, right? You're obviously have to make sure you're not running afoul of SEC laws. You got to make sure you're filing the right forms. You're doing all these things that you just don't have time as a founder to really read up on and make sure you're following it. So get legal involved right from the get-go. It is expensive, but usually there will be lesser fees up front, right? They're building a business as well, and they're saying, hey, this founder has got a great idea. I think they're going to have legs. I want to be part of this in the future. So a lot of times they will give you discounted rates or even write off some of the invoice to help with that. But certainly, as the rounds progress, they do get more and more complicated. To your point about the investor fees or your due diligence partners fees, usually you do have to pay for those. But what I would recommend is negotiating a cap so that you don't get some massive bill that comes out of this that you were not expecting, and at least have some idea of where that's coming in. But I wouldn't even say it's a necessary evil, because if you don't use them, you're probably going to get screwed by your documentation and what your investor. Well, I shouldn't say screwed. You need to make sure that you really understand what you're signing up for, and counsel is great for that. They'll walk you through every piece and say, hey, this is a little bit weird, and these are the implications if we go forward with that. And you can push back or not, right? But just having that, not having to try to figure that out on your own, critical. As well as, again, all the regulatory side. Even I am coming down to founder stock, right? You have 30 days to register that with the IRS for preferential tax treatment in the future. Things like that, right? I mean, you just don't know about all these things. So right from the get-go, make sure that you're getting someone involved, and then not just at the rounds, of course, contracts, making sure that you've got some sort of arrangement to just keep everything above board and really understand what you're getting into.
I think those are the biggest things. The only thing I would add is you need a cap table management system. Don't try to do that in spreadsheets. You'll screw it up. And I've seen it in investor docs now that they require it, and I think it's a good practice. I know it's a little expensive for startups, but it's worth it to have that done right. And the second is just to sync kind of every once in a while with your attorney, a little email. Is there anything from your perspective that we need to get done? And then saying, these might be upcoming board resolutions that we might need. If you don't know what a board resolution is, as a CEO, learn what a board resolution is. And then any equity grants, that tends to be one that comes up a lot, right? Anytime you give people options, have a system with your attorney where that gets done pretty quickly. Again, they could probably issue it on a cap table system. You have to do a board approval, right? Get good at doing that so that that's not something you have to figure out each time, because it will happen over and over again.
Great point. As an investor, I think it's almost immediate to us who's been leveraging their counsel well and who doesn't do that in a good way. Certainly, it makes our lives a lot easier when we look under the hood and everything is kind of tied up with a nice bow. I would also add that I'm of course biased, but thinking about your counsel in a different way makes a big difference. And kind of not thinking of them just as a cost center, but also as a thought partner. I think, good lawyers, good VC lawyers have a really good perspective on the landscape and will be able to kind of give you some really targeted advice. So thinking about counsel in the right way, I think also makes a big difference. Also, it might cost something up front, but again, you're always looking to raise again and ultimately exit the company. And if things aren't lined up the way they should be, either from a governance perspective or with your material agreements, that could be a ding on the purchase price, or it could be a ding on the valuation. So certainly having all of that kind of squared away and having good counsel looking at your materials is going to go a long way.
So something everyone's thinking about, the macroeconomy, looming recession, what's going on. We're hearing investors say try to have at least 3 years of runway, where the prior advice was 18 months. What other trends are you seeing? Do you think there are different ways that founders should be thinking about deploying their funds, their burn rate, given the economy?
I hope you go first, Tim.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it's probably not a surprise. We instituted a hiring freeze, right? I mean, outside we had one key role turnover, and we're replacing that. But other than that, we said, okay, we're not hiring anymore. We're sticking with the burn rate we've got. I think one of the things that as a hardware company, for one, we would love to have 3 years of runway. In order to do that, we would probably have to give up like half the company at this stage. So we like this next the round that we're currently doing, that gives us right about 15 months. We don't think we're going to need that much to get to a Series A, but it is about how, because really right now we just need data, and then we'll be able to go. But getting that much, it really depends on how much of the company are you willing to give up. The other side of that, though, is investors typically don't want to invest in a company if the founders don't have enough skin in the game, right? If they don't have like a lot of equity, if they're like, I got 5% left, if it gets hard, they're just going to go, screw this, I'm leaving, right? I don't, because I have a lot less hair now than 4 years ago. There's a lot more wrinkles. There's a lot of stress that goes along with this, and you've got to have that drive and that passion to see it through, because anybody else you hire is not going to have that. So that all being said, would love to get, 3 years. 18 months is still typically where we get. But the other side I was going to mention, everybody looks at salary burn, and it's easy to see, this is how much salary, this is how much benefits, and that's my monthly burn. But you got to look at G&A, of course, and then something like with hardware companies, we have to do a lot of R&D, and I think that was one of the things that we just massively under budgeted for, was looking at, here's our burn rate of $200K a month on salaries. Oh damn, we've got another 50 to 100 sometimes of R&D expenses. So now all of a sudden you're 50% above your burn rate, and saying, whoa, how do we get this back under control and make sure that we do have that runway to get there? So that was an early learning for us, is hardware just takes longer, for one, and there's a lot of things you have to buy, and molds, and all of these toolings and things that you're doing. So making sure you really understand what are those expenses is so critical. But again, for us, it was, if we can get 3 years, I would love that.
Yeah, I've heard that advice as well. I don't think I have a single company that has 3 years of runway. So I'm not sure if that's an impossible standard or not. Sure, nice to have. Yes. Yeah. I think if you're in it, whether you're raising or you just raised or recently raised, understanding what your scenarios are and the trade-offs, right? So like plan A, plan B, plan C, and understanding, well, if I do hit these revenue targets, then I can keep this much burn, or if I don't, then I need to do a deeper cut. And really being honest about when those deadlines are, because the thing that I see happen is the deal will go through next month, and then that becomes 3 months, and then that's 3 months of burn that you've lost. So that's where I'll use the word again, discipline in startups is around, if you set out a plan, like if we don't hit these revenue targets, because that's money coming in, then we're gonna have to make these cuts in order to have a longer runway, maybe it's not 3 years, but like, can we get to 2? Then just being disciplined about those trade-offs, the levers.
Oh, that's great. That's a great point. I think the macro economy has certainly showed us that, it's sector specific, right? But there is a trending downwards of valuations. Maybe having a more realistic, perspective around what the valuation of your company is a good idea up front. And certainly, I think we are now in a land where, the extra kind of founder-friendly terms are kind of receding, and like with high vote stock or, other founder-friendly terms. So going into a deal, I would say, we're in different times now, and to kind of have a more realistic, outlook on what investors are expecting is a good idea.
So we talked about how even after you finish a raise, you're always raising. Sometimes, Tim, you mentioned that it takes a while, the checks kind of trickle in. What happens? You've closed your round, you meet an investor who wants to give you a check. How do you respond to that? Do you say wait to the next round? Do you open your round back up? What do you think?
You've never had that happen, Tim. Never. That never happens.
Yeah, I mean, in our case, we did have, like I said, there was a couple investors that did fall out. So we were able to then take that, or to base, it's, again, more legal costs and more documentation we have to swap around. But we were able to we had Steve Jackson, who is very famous in the tabletop industry. He goes back to the 70s, actually an attorney as well, originally. He came in late into the round, and I think we had I can't remember how much we had left. Maybe it was like $20,000 or something. He's like, I take all my money. We're like, we can only take this amount, and he's like, oh, okay, that's too bad. And we then had a couple people came out, and then we went back to him, and he was able to invest immediately, right? So there are times like that happens. I think for us, I mean, you could, right? You can go do another board resolution and say, oh, we're going to do a safe or something for an extra $50,000 or something. It's for one, it's, do you need the money? Just because there's money out there, they're great. I mean, if they want it now, probably they're going to want it later as well, so you can keep them around and keep them interested. But if you need the money, great. If it doesn't make your current investors mad that you're taking on more dilution and actually affecting the company that way, then take it. But for us, we always look at it and say, when we go in for an ask, and assume I'm under raising, but I don't want to over raise either, and I want to make sure that we're keeping the fiduciary responsibility to not only ourselves but to our existing investors. So I guess it depends, as you like to say.
It totally depends. Yeah. Right? If it's someone who's super strategic, you often make more exceptions than if they aren't. Everybody likes to be a fence sitter until they know the round is going to come together. So one way to minimize this, right, is to be very clear in your communication that the round is tipping, it's coming together, it's closing, get it, being clear about that moment. And then if they don't get in the round, it's really your choice. It's actually a lovely moment for founders to say, no, I'm sorry, round is closed, right? The power definitely flips at that moment. And you get to decide. Again, as a founder, you have a lot more power in a round, especially at that key moment, right? You don't have to be a jerk about it, right? And the other thing that happened, the day after the raise, you should take all the people who said no, you're too early, and all those people go into your top of your pipeline for your next round, right? It's the first day. They go into if they opt in, they're in your communication for your updates, right? So.
That's a great point. I mean, I know our team hears that all the time, right? That no, the round's closed. We're not raising right now. We are looking at companies that are in various stages of their fundraising process. So we're quite used to hearing there's no room, or you have to wait to the next round. I think investors that have true conviction in your product and in you will will be there, right? They'll maintain that relationship, and I think that's a good way to kind of test your prospective investor base as well, is by seeing if they're around, when you have your next raise, then that's a good investor.
So we have a few minutes left. I'd love to have one last any last words of wisdom, and then if there are any questions, we'll have a couple minutes to take any of those.
I cleaned up my bookshelf this weekend, and I have books for the first 4 questions that are asked. So,
Nice.
books I loved so much, I bought them twice and didn't realize. So.
Go for it. Sorry.
So the question is, what is the using grants as opposed to equity or debt or another vehicle?
But with grants, there's usually you can't really predict when they're going to come in, or colors of money type of stuff, and so there is the way you phrased it, that bridge round I'm looking at right now, to get them coming in.
Yeah. I'll give my short answer. As an investor, I love all non-dilutive capital, period.
No, I think we certainly encourage grants, right, from the Department of Energy or wherever they're coming. I think obviously being non-dilutive is great, and it's a great way to promote your company. I think when you're looking, again, back to the always be raising, after you get a grant, I think that adds immediate cred to your company. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, we have actually. Yeah, we've. We applied for SBIR and that whole round. We didn't actually get that, but we've gotten Epic Games gave us a grant as part of their program. It's fantastic, right? I mean, it's truly non-dilutive. I would say, as far as do you want to do a bridge round, it all comes down to timing. If you feel like the market's ripe and I got to go now, definitely go out and raise the money and move, right? If you're like, hey, maybe I'm a little bit under the radar and I can wait, then you can take that chance. But I would say, if it's especially early on, getting some family and friends, do something to keep that moving. Because usually if it's a good idea, someone else has it as well. So you want to keep moving.
And often a bridge round is structured in a less expensive legal way. So you could do what's called a SAFE, which is an instrument Y Combinator put out. It's basically an agreement that's not changed much, or a convertible note, so that those are convertible instruments that will turn into equity in your next financing. So those are good options if you want.
Long term, we're looking to go into an ESOP, working with Colorado's economic office, and so that's kind of like the 5-year strategy where this opening group will convert to an ESOP. So thoughts on that, perhaps?
So you're saying a bridge round is by employees or?
So initially it's going to be just a core group. Right now I'm sole owner, doing this 4 years now, manufacturing automation. But the goal by 2026 is to take it to these top 2 employees. There's some assumptions baked in.
Yeah, you guys probably have a better answer on that. I mean, for us, we set aside 20% of the company as an employee pool up front. So when we did our initial equity round, we said, here's 20% of the company, and this is going to be for all those option grants and everything like that. It's not officially an ESOP program, but it is, along those lines. I don't know.
Thoughts here?
So is the question around having an ESOP in general? I'm sorry. So I guess the way we look at an ESOP from our perspective is all based off of what it represents to the fully diluted cap table of the company.
And just to dive in, so we're talking about an ESOP as an employee stock option plan, which is a plan that's set aside to give equity to your service providers.
Yeah, and look, from our perspective, it's kind of a numbers game, and what we're looking for is when we raise that your ESOP is big enough that you're going to have it, have enough room to hire more people in the future. What we don't want to see happen is that you raise money and then you immediately increase your ESOP and we get diluted, right? So we're kind of looking that you have a significant ESOP, you have a plan for hiring, and that's not going to be dilutive to us as investors.
Just a follow-up question on those employee stock option plans that are set aside. In future funds and future raises, do those also get diluted?
Yeah, so in future, so with each new raise, it depends, right? This is also, to be candid, a negotiated point with your investor. Certainly with equity raises, there's the investor will often ask that there's a refresh to the plan, and that's typically floats around 10% post money. Whether that gets included in the pre-money valuation of your company, or if it's on the back end, that's a negotiated point. But typically investors are going to look that there's some runway for potential new hires.
Can I add a quick point to that? Because actually, it's a pet peeve of mine with investors. So it's totally fair for them to want your cap table to have a section of equity set aside for employees that are about to come on, right? So that they don't get diluted by those equity grants. I get that. But understand that investors have an incentive to make it as large as possible, and I'll tell you one reason why. Not only the dilution round, what happens if your company gets acquired and that stock option that you granted, right, you put in a set aside, it gets doled back out to the cap table pro rata with ownership. So it's a way. It came out of your stock as founders, but it doesn't come back to you as a founder in an acquisition. And it can be a second bite at equity for investors. So just know that that it could also be playing in a super sneaky back way, right? And the way I think about it for founders, if you want to advocate for yourself, is if your investor is saying it should be 20% and you say it should be 10%, go look at your leadership team and calculate out what percent equity you're going to offer for all the key roles that are left in your company, and whatever that total number in percentage is, have an argument about why it should be that number, when instead of just saying, oh, market standard is 15%, right? That's a vanilla or standard term in an agreement, but you can certainly have an educated discussion about what your company's cap table set aside should be.
And I'll just add, going back to my previous point, this is a great opportunity or issue that is great to leverage your counsel with, right? If you have the right counsel, for example, like Silicon Legal Strategy, who sees thousands of deals, just a little plug there, but who sees thousands of deals, right? They're going to tell you, okay, this is market norm, this isn't market norm, this is a good, we can negotiate it this way or that way. Really having those outside people kind of, leveraging their knowledge is going to help on specifically with that point.
Okay, so two-parted question. Looking back, what would you say would be a huge red flag that you are learning from that now becomes what is a green flag looking forward to what says, oh, this is a good thing because you learned from what was a very bad thing?
In terms of investors or what?
For founders or for investors?
I think it's actually kind of for both. For on your side, you had this moment where you thought you had money in the bank and then it wasn't. So what might be the red flag that looking back, you're like, whoa, that was that moment where something went wrong? How would you look to it as being a green flag that you're like, okay, this is a good sign now? And for investors, how do you look at something and be like, nope, that's a red flag. I don't want to get involved with these people. And that's when you pull out and what looks like a green flag moving forward.
It's something that Julie said earlier. When the round is closing, right, it's like a feeding frenzy, and people do want in, which gives you, again, don't have to be a jerk about it, but it does let you be choosy on who's coming in on the cap table, and that's one thing that so far we've been really lucky to be able to do, because when you get and I shouldn't say a vibe, but I mean, there's usually something about when an investor comes at you, it's like, here, I want in for this amount of money, and they are almost too aggressive, or it's marriage, right? When the analogy is when you're getting an investor on your cap table, it's a marriage, and you don't want to marry somebody you just met on the first day or something, right? So you have to make sure that when you're evaluating investors, do your due diligence on them as well, and part of that is talking to other founders. How are they to deal with? How are what are they like to be on, to be a part of? I mean, especially if they're going to be a part of the board or a major stakeholder, you definitely want to make sure you've got good due diligence there, because we've had a couple investors that we've actually turned their money down and said, you know what, thank you, but no thank you. We're going to go in a different direction, and obviously weren't mean about it, but at the same token, it's like you got to be very, very careful who you're bringing on, because it could be a massive headache to deal with until your company is sold.
Yeah, cool. I'll take the other side. It really depends on what kind of investors, what they're willing to sign up for. I found different tolerances. Here's stuff I won't tolerate, or if I see it in the initial kind of dating phase, is kind of a I'm done moment. In the dating phase, you're all on your best behavior on both sides. Right, so one thing I think about is any behavior I see in the dating phase, I just amplify 10x, and that's what I expect to happen once the check is in the door, right? So if your investor is not responsive, or if the founder is not responsive, like not communicating well, that's only going to get worse. So that might kill a deal. If there's not a good connection, or if I get like an ego or not being coachable, if I get inklings of that, I'm probably out, because I think that behavior is going to get worse too. And if you're not going to at least listen to my advice, you don't have to take it or not, but listening to it and feeling like it's not going to go anywhere, that's a real turnoff for me as a VC. I will say that I shared this with one founder, and it surprised them the other day. One of my other gut checks is, if this founder calls me at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, am I excited to pick up the phone? Right? Because that really gets down to like, do I really want to be in this person's world? Because I'm gonna be if we do it right. Right? And when things get hard for you, because they will, and you call me, like, do I want to take that phone call? So, anyway.
Oh, that's a great point. I won't speak too much to kind of red flags on the investor side. I'm not on the deal team. Again, I'm kind of on the operations team. I do know that there's, I think, a certain emotional connection that has to be made kind of upfront, and like you said, that ties in with communication skills, and being open and forthright is really important. There's and that kind of level of communication will carry itself over into what our team does on the business diligence side. There's kind of a long dating process where our investors are looking at your company and making a decision on whether to invest. And then after that phase is over, there's the legal diligence, and there's all types of red flags there. But again, that's where having good legal counsel and being able to keep your ducks in a row is gonna help a lot.
We are out of time. We want to make sure that the next panel gets enough time to set up. Feel free to come. I can stick around, and hopefully we all can stick around for a few more minutes. If you have any questions for me or the other panelists, you can feel free to reach out to me, Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, at siliconlegal.com, and I can funnel it to the panelists. Thank you all for coming today.
I do. I really did clean up my bookshelf.
I've done that a lot of times, right? Just order on Amazon at a whim.
Okay.
That's great.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you all. I forgot to thank you to the panelists.